We start with the verse which goes like this: Jatilo Mundi Lunchita Kesha, Kasha Yambara Bhukruta Vesha, Pashyan Pina Pashyati Mudo, Yudanamitam Bhukruta Vesha. The theme of this particular verse is renunciation is difficult without true understanding of the subject matter. Let's take Sanskrit word at a time. One ascetic with matted hair, Jatilo Mund, one shaven with shaven head, Mundi, one with ears pulled up one by one, Lunchita Kesha, another parading in his colorful clothes stained with yellow, brown, and red dress, Kasha Yambara Bhukruta Vesha. He's saying, look at these fools who supposedly seeing do not see the reality. Pashyannapi chana pashyati mura. Indeed, these disguises are simply to fill their bellies. Yudara nimittam, he udara nimittam, we. They are dressing in this way. And ultimately reminding us, seek Govinda, seek Govinda. This verse is credited to Padmapad. The name Padmapad was attached to him following an unusual instance. For him, Guru was everything, and the command of his Guru was ultimate. When he was on the other side of the flooded river, his Guru Sri Shankara called for him. Without even thinking that he might be drowned in that swollen river, he began walking straight towards his Guru. A lotus or Padma appeared every time he took a step so that he would not drown till he reached across the other bank of the river and placed his head on the feet of his Guru. That's why he's called Padmapad. He's also known as Sananandan. He came from Chola kingdom from south, and his original name, Vishnu Sharma. His only surviving work was written in response to his teacher's request for him to write a commentary on his own Brahma Sutra Bhashya, Shankaracharya. Unfortunately, it was destroyed by his jealous uncle. The surviving text, which is available now, is exactly what Shankara could recall from his memory. He was such a powerful, bright disciple that he became the first head of the sacred center, Govardhan Mutt, in Jagannath Puri, on the east coast of India, one of the four famous such centers established by Adi Shankaracharya. So the scholarly work that he wrote and Shankara remembered was his theory of notion of superimposition, adhyasa. He argued that the relationship between jiva, that means empirical self, and the Atman, the underlying spiritual self, was that of reflection of the prototype, reflection of the prototype. According to this theory of reflection, Pratibimbavad, the jiva is an appearance of absolute reality, Brahman, as reflected in ignorance. The jiva, or the face of in the mirror, is none other than the Atman, or the original face. Hence, the understanding of the essential self is not so much a matter of mystical experience occurring in time, but as a matter of inquiry consisting of the careful and concentrated introspection of and reflection upon one's ordinary experience. Pratibimbava. Here in this verse, he's commenting in a very critical fashion about the individuals who disguise as renunciates without any proper mental preparation and scriptural studies under the guidance of an enlightened guru. There absolutely no clarity of vision to see the divinity. Their hairdos and clothings are simply the disguises to gain a prominent role in the society and simply to fill their stomachs on the generosity of the kind devotees. Padmapad felt Samyak nyasaha iti sannyasa, meaning complete renunciation of the world and its possessions and attachments. He is reminding that last distracted one and calling these people as Muda. Please understand why you put on these robes. How do you fail to see the values by which you should be living, or the objective with which you have taken up this life? Wearing these clothes should not be simply to fill up your bellies. Again, why do we have white, yellow, red, orange? They represent different traditions of renunciation known as sampradayas. But orange color of fire, orange being a color of fire, fire stands out most importantly for renunciation. One who has renounced the pleasures of the world wears an orange robe. Here it represents attachment and a sign of beauty. The shaving of the head is for that very reason. Those who do not shave their heads but still have hair, they tend to keep them matted so that they indicate that they do not waste any time on taking care of the hair. And plucking of the hair denotes deliberate suffering, showing penance. Even though the renunciation is in the mind and does not have to be displayed outwardly, the orange color robes still remain as a constant reminder, just as three threads of the sacred thread or Yajnopavita stand for three main deities, Brahma, Vishnu, and Mahesh. That individual is the worshipper of those deities, and the sacred thread stands for his commitment to the worship and certain daily rituals that go along with that. Padmapad is saying, unfortunately, quite a few of these individuals in this category, Pashyannapi na pashyati mura, are these people who indeed do know what they need to be doing as renunciates externally, but do not follow their vows and do not carry out their responsibilities. Supposedly, they really don't see the reality at all. They're indeed charlatans misusing offered privileges by the society. He also probably reflected that there may be some people who sincerely take up renunciation, but find it rather difficult to sustain those values and do get distracted. And hence, in most of the important monasteries, proper preparation takes place for a certain period of time, till the time the maturity develops in the individual. So typically, these are called brahmacharis. They wear white robes till the time the guru is satisfied with the preparation, and then only guru gives that individual the vow of renunciation. What's interesting is that even 1,200 years ago in Rishikesh, it's obvious that there were many impostors in the sphere of life at that time as well, just as we see them around us all over, especially in the past 100 years with the popularity of Eastern faiths in the Western world. This is the first verse expressed by Padmapad, very powerful verse, that just wearing a dress for show is not enough. You really have to understand what it stands for. The next verse is desires just don't go up, give up. Desires just don't disappear, even with old age. The words go like this: Angam galitam palitam mundam, dashanabhinam jatam tundam, vruddho yati gruhitva dandam, tatapane munchati asha pindam, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam. Let's take Sanskrit phrase at a time. The body has been worn out, angam galitam. The head has gone gray, palitam mundam. Toothless has become the mouth, dashanabhinam jatam tundam. The old man moves about having taken up a cane. Vruddho yati gruhitva dandam. Even then, he never leaves his bundle of desires. Tadapi na munchati asha pindam, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam. All right, coming back again. Who's the author of this verse? It is told that Adi Shankara, while in Sringeri, met a boy named Giri and accepted him as his disciple, calling him Totak. He was hardworking, loyal, and conscientious disciples would occasionally arrive late in the class since he felt responsible to pick up after many of his classmates who left for the class with their chores unfinished. While in the class, this Giri would be attentive but quite very quiet, never ask any questions. And because he didn't ask questions, he didn't appear quite bright to his classmates. One day, when he was once again a little late, one of the classmates pointed towards the wall and said, "No, it's the same if Shankara taught to this dumb object who has not come in time as he taught the wall across," referring to him being so dumb like a wall. Shankaracharya did not like his comment and wanted to reward Giri or Totaka for his loyalty and devotion. He mentally granted Totaka the complete knowledge of all the Shastras and asked him to share his knowledge with his classmates when he arrived in the class on that day. Out came out Totak Ashtakam, Totaka Ashtakam, 8 verses summarizing that wisdom and seeking the Guru's blessings. And from that day onwards, all the classmates who were critical of him were totally silenced. He became the first head of the Jyotirmat, the northern spiritual center in Badrinath, in Uttarakhand. Now, what is he doing in this verse? He colorfully describing that the power of desire to enjoy the sense objects is irresistible and never ending, unfortunately, all through the life for most. To have sensual desires and passions for a man or a woman when one is young, hale and hearty, energetic and vigorous is just natural and within the context of dharma, not only considered as good, but also is encouraged. Because remember, samsaris are the ones who sustain the entire society. They take care of the youngsters as they're growing up, take care of the elderly who need help, and also make sure the community activities go on successfully and help one another. However, to carry on with such hopes and desires, in the late stage of life, when the human being should be much more spiritually involved, instead of being evolved, he is unfortunately very pitiful. It's a very colorful depiction of the physical condition with advancing age. The worn out body, the gray hair, the toothless mouth, mild bending of the back, in English we call medical kyphosis or scoliosis, with individual walking with a much needed support of a wooden staff. Shri Krishna also has said, Indriyani pramathini haranti prasabam mana. Hey Arjuna, infatuation, attachment, or love, if not destroyed through knowledge, the force of senses is so powerful that the sense organs can abduct the mind, even of the discriminating mind who's trying to stabilize it devotedly. So you have to be controlling it with that knowledge. Totaka's message is very clear. Maturity must arrive with age. The man who is leaning on the wooden staff danda, because unable to carry on his own weight, still seems to carry a tremendous burden on his head, consisting of a variety of desires, expectations, hopes, and cravings, instead of developing the emotional maturity, which implies becoming free from dependence and intense attachment. One can develop inner composure and cheerfulness, as we have discussed earlier, simply by being in the company of good people and learning from the enlightened individuals, by being more prayerful and thoughtful, by more sharing and giving. We finished 2 verses so far. I'll discuss a couple more before we stop. The subject matter of the next verse is the noose of desire does not spare even the renunciates. Very similar to what the earlier verse was. He's describing a person. Agre vanne pushte bhanu. Agre vanne pushte bhanu. Ratro chubuka samarpita janu. Karatala bhikshas tarutala vasa. Tatapane munchati asha pasha. Bhaja Govindam. Bhaja Govindam. Let's take Sanskrit phrase at a time. Agre vanne. In front is the bonfire to keep the body warm. On the back is the sun rays. Prushthe Bhanu. Bhanu, sun. Late at night, he sits with his knees held under his chin in the fetal position to keep warm. Ratrau, Chubuka Samarbita Janu. The fetal position, bending his knees and puts the chin so he remains warm. What does he have in his hand? In the scooped hands are the little box, what do you call pot for bhiksha, karatala bhiksha, and lives under the shelter of some tree, tarutala vasa. And the worst part about it is commenting, and as yet the noose of desires spares him not. Tadapati munchati asha pasha. Instead, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam. Now this verse is credited to yet another bright disciple of Shankara, Hastamalaka Acharya, Hastamalaka. He grew up in a small village called Bali, present day is Shivalli or Udupi. There were several Agnihotri Brahmins, including Prabhakara, his father. This boy had undergone sacred ceremony, but was totally disinterested in any rituals. He remained quiet the whole day. He was considered as lazy and dumb because he would not be interacting with anybody. He was brought to Shankaracharya to receive his blessing. Maybe that will improve him. When asked by Shankara who he was, he replied in 12 verses containing the gist of Advaita philosophy. Impressed by his knowledge, Shankaracharya accepted him as a disciple, and he was named as Hastamalaka because he had one amlaka fruit in his hand when he was meeting Shankaracharya. He ended up to be the first head of Dwarka Pitam, a spiritual center in the western region of India at Dwarka. Here, Hastamalaka is describing the mental status of an individual who was given up the role of as a householder and is doing penance in the elements during the winter time, but without any mental preparation or true understanding, which is absolutely essential. He is describing those who ostensibly practice ascetics, but in fact are mentally spending themselves in sensuous self-dissipation as hypocrites, just as Sri Krishna has described the one who, controlling the organs of action, sits with the mind remembering those very sense objects, is deluded and is called a person of false conduct, hypocrite, mithyachara. Karmendriyani sanyamya, yaste manasasmaran, indriyarthan vimudhatma, mithyacharas chauchyate. The physical self-denial by itself does not accomplish the goals of liberation. But on the contrary, if sensual desires are not eliminated simultaneously, they can erupt in a wrong way in an appropriate time, leading to further degradation of their individual. It's a fact. The physical self-denial does increase the individual vitality. However, that increased vitality needs to be directed towards personal spiritual growth and not towards ruinous misadventures and the sexual exploits of the weak and vulnerable, who sadly approach such individuals for help and guidance. Desires, attachments, and aversions do not go away just because one lives a life of austerity. or self-denial, as this verse describes, but comes about only as a result of intelligent living arising from mature thinking and proper guidance from the enlightenment. These desires have to be grown out of and not simply given up. It is the mind that the desires have to be renounced in. A true renunciate is the one who has renounced all his cravings and desires. A desire arises when we do not feel good about ourselves because there is a sense of incompleteness or inadequacy in the mind. Renunciation begins with giving up attachments and aversions. It comes about as a mark of maturity and understanding that we indeed are complete. One needs to serve a teacher who is learned in scriptures and steadfast in the knowledge of Brahman, Kshotriya, and Brahmanist. Having analyzed the worldly experience and achievements acquired through karma, a mature person discerns that the limitless of Brahman cannot be created by action. To know that limitless, he should go to the twigs in his hand to a teacher who is learned and well grounded in the knowledge of Brahman. It's from Mundaka Upanishad. Tad vinyartam saha gurum eva adhigachet samatpani shotriyam brahmadeshtam. When one understands that one is seeking that is limitless, which cannot be created, which only to be known, one's attention is drawn to the knowledge and to the inquiry rather than doing simply the material things. It is through viveka or discrimination the desires can be transformed from the desires of the mundane worldly things to the desire of knowledge of Brahman. Desire is still there, except that now it becomes a desire for moksha or desire for knowledge. Such an individual has realized that it is knowledge alone that is going to remove the sense of incompleteness. Nai jnanena sadrisham pavitram iha vidyate. There is indeed no other purifier equivalent to knowledge. Hence, the mature individual directs himself towards the studies of scriptures and gives up the pursuit of material achievements under the guidance of an enlightened teacher. And the final verse I thought we should study this morning is subject matter is one cannot gain moksha or freedom without gaining full knowledge and understanding of Brahman. The verse goes like this: Kurute Ganga Sagara Gamanam Vrataparana Athva Dhyanam Vrataparanam Athva Dhanam Jnana Vihina Sarvamatena Bhajatane Muktim Janmashatena. One may go to pilgrimage where the sacred Ganges is, or she meets ocean, Kurute Ganga Sagara Gamanam, or observe vows or distribute gifts in charity, Vratapalan Athava Dhyanam. If one is devoid of the first-hand experience of the truth, Jnana Vihina, according to all schools of thought, Sarvamatena does not get liberated even 100 life cycles. Bhajati na muktim janmashatena. Si Govinda, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam. Now, this verse is attributed to a disciple known as Subodha. He extends here the theme of poorly conceived penance of a human being who is yet to receive the true knowledge of reality, the Brahman. Pilgrimage, charity, penance are all good and worthwhile, but without realizing the knowledge of Brahman from enlightened teacher, individual cannot gain moksha or true freedom even after undergoing 100 birth cycles as human beings. What is interesting is here is a verse from Atma Bodha. Bodho anya sanebhya hi sakshan mokshaika sadaram pakasya vannivajnanam vina mokshana siddhyati. It says, just as the individual masters the cooking skills only by mastering the intricacies of the fire firsthand. Pakasya bandi jnanam vina moksha na siddhi. Basically, you have to know the fire by firsthand. The knowledge gained through the first-hand experience only can liberate one from the never-ending cycles of both birth and death. If you look at Ganga Sagar Gamana, we can look at that particular phrase to represent a sacred center or pilgrimage along the banks of the river Ganges, just like Rishikesh, Banaras, and several other sacred places, Rishikesh, till Ganges merges into the ocean in the Bay of Bengal. Sagar mentioned here could also represent sacred places located on the ocean front in south, such as Rameshwar as well. The main idea presented here is that pilgrimage is a process of self-purification through visiting any sacred place in any part of India. The individuals who come to these sacred places come from different parts of India with deep devotion to seek blessings. Individuals spoke different languages and different customs, but the culture and value system was exactly the same. Nowadays, most of us can visit these sacred places fairly easily due to improved roads and modes of transportation. In the past, however, when this text was documented about 200 years ago, during those times, going on pilgrimage often meant the individual undertaking such a long journey on foot and extending over several months or even years, not even survive the arduous journey that he can return home. So that is Tirtha Yatra. Next word he mentioned was Vrata Palana, that means observance of vows that helps us to cultivate our willpower. Vow is a deliberate act of self-denial, such as to observe a fast, not eat, or eat but only once a day. Regular fasting on specific day of the week, like Chaturthi, Ekadashi of the month, or certain other auspicious days, is very common. Fulfilling those vows gives us a certain satisfaction that we can control the basic physical desires, needs, and also increasing the strength of our willpower. Besides, during this, just when you're performing the fast like this, one spends much more time in prayers and worship. Austerities such as pilgrimage, observing the vows, or giving money to the worthwhile causes and the people who are in need, charity, is good, very useful, but not enough for self-purification. One may be able to accomplish varieties of siddhis or powers, but not the liberation or moksha. Devoid of knowledge of Brahman, jnana vihina, moksha is not possible. And Subodha is concluding here that even when you do all these kind of activities, if you haven't gained that knowledge, jnana, even 100 life cycles of human being, you won't get the moksha or liberation. The bondage is simply a projection. The bondage we're talking about is simply a projection of our mind because of our false sense of inadequacy. In reality, the self is free, but is taken to be bound. It's taken to be limited because of aviveka or non-discrimination. As we are learning in Nirvana Shatakam, that body-mind-sense complex is erroneously taken to be the self. Because of that imaginary problem or misunderstanding, we consider ourselves as incomplete, inadequate, and mortal, which leads to our unhappiness with that constant fear of death. The key simply is to recognize for each and every one of us, all of us who are goal-oriented human beings, if you remember, learn about Kashchit Dhiraha, those who are thoughtful, goal-oriented human beings, who want to see the Pratyagatma, must withdraw our attention from the usual activities, which commonly in the pursuit of material wealth, Because if they really want to desire immortality, amrutatvam icchan. However, as they withdraw, they must not become isolated. The relationship with the world must simply change. It's no longer a relationship of exploiting, but instead one of giving. When somebody you meet, what can I get out of this guy? What can I do for this person? It is a relationship of worship. These individuals both acquire in abiding knowledge. The individual who understands that and that kind of activity acquire an abiding mind, a mind with utmost faith or shraddha. Again, as we mentioned earlier, it is not a blind faith, but instead it is an utmost willingness to advance their studies till their goal is reached through personal conviction. These individuals maintain a positive outlook, meaning they have shraddha and absolute confidence, utmost sincerity to pursue the God with intense longing to gain the knowledge of Brahman. Again, we just have to follow the steps that Shankaracharya laid down for us the last session. Satsangatve nitsangatvam. Satsanga is the company of good, creates the freedom from unhealthy attachment or attachment with wrong type of individuals who can influence our behavior. There is attachment of good, there is detachment from bad. Thus, when we keep the company of good, we slowly grow out of the influence of the bad and nitsangatva. Every unhealthy attachment or dependence upon the world has to be given up. Again, remember, we emphasized last time, it does not mean giving up contact with the family or running away from the world, but only the dependence on them has to be given up. To have love for your family and friends is not an attachment. When the sense of overwhelming or unhealthy attachment is withdrawn, remember, sense of overwhelming and unhealthy attachment is withdrawn, and selfish desires are dissipated. Nitsangatva. The mind becomes clear, slowly becoming free from moha or delusion. Mind, as I mentioned, is like water. When it's turbulent, it's very difficult to see. But when the mind becomes calm, everything becomes clearer. When the delusion is no longer there, all delusory false values disappear. The state of nirmohatvam, clarity of vision, returns as this mind gradually gets pure. This purification of mind means impurity of mind, namely the ragadveshas, or in other words, unhealthy attachments and aversions, are no longer there. Such a purified mind enjoys peace and tranquility and becomes capable of understanding the truth. Nirmohatve nischala tattva. This tranquil mind becomes objective, is able to understand exactly what the scriptures tell us. Until then, whatever we hear, whatever we read is processed by mind, distorted by unhealthy attachments and aversions, raga dvesha. Thus, one develops discrimination, as I mentioned, viveka. When those distractions are no longer there, the mind becomes capable to appreciate the unfoldment of the vision of the scriptures and understands clearly what the scriptures reveal. We slowly develop an abidance in that knowledge, or mind or antakarana goes through a process of shravanam, or a process of listening, mananam, or carefully reflecting, and finally getting to know Brahman through final integrative and transformative process, nididhyasanam. In reality, the final step is simply a continuum of shravanam and mananam. We come to understand that awareness, chit, is our true nature, the one that makes us sentient. This awareness, our true nature, Atman, is an integral part of our single cosmic awareness all around. It always exists and thus immortal, besides unbound, limitless, happy, and anant. One comes to realize that Atman and Brahman are exactly one and the same. Tat Tvam Asi. I'll stop here. These are the 4 verses we had a chance to review this morning. I would like to hear some comments, questions, and discussion. Thank you.
Pete, Prasanna here.
Hey, Prasanna.
Yeah, very nice discussions on these 4 verses. Verse number 14, Padmapada talks about false people, pretentious people, hoodwinkers, and that reminded me of a line from Gilbert and Sullivan's operetta, HMS Pinafore. Things are seldom as they seem. Skim milk masquerades as cream. That's exactly what he was talking about, the pretentious people who think they see, but in reality, they don't see. Then if the next verse, he talks about the lot of the householders, how they fall prey to desires. So that we don't misunderstand that it is only the householders who do not entertain desires. In the next verse, he talks about the lot of the monk, who also entertains desires, and he points out self-denial is not all, but you should curb the desire as they enter into your mind. Prajahati yada kaman, sarvan parthamanogata. So that I remember very well. And then he talks about, people wonder, I go on pilgrimage, I go to the temple, I recite slokas, is that enough? He said, no, they're only preparations for serious meditation. And those are important, they're necessary, but that's not the end. They're only the beginning, the steps for leading you to meditation so that you understand your true nature, which is Shivoham, Shivoham. Very nice discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Prasanna.
Namaste, Shashi. This is Anant here. How are you?
Thanks, Anant. Good to hear your voice.
Yes. Thank you for your pravachan this morning on Bhaja Govindam. I was just offering a short comment generally on the verses covered today, but specifically on the verse that Nirvan just asked about. This is Jatilo Mundi Lunchita Kesha. And I think that there are two important points about this verse that are also worthy of consideration. One is it generally raises the question, how do we who are living today, in today's world and searching for the guru and searching for teaching, how do we locate the authentic teacher? How do we know that the teacher is an authentic teacher? Because I think Shankara is warning us here, as you quite rightly pointed out, that there is also a lot of deception in the religious world. Yeah. Because there are so many self-appointed teachers also
yes
today.
Yep.
Yes, self-appointed people who present themselves as teachers. And I think one always has to remember what you have been also stressing throughout these talks, that our tradition is a tradition of teaching and learning. This is in Sanskrit we speak of it as a tradition of sampradaya, a lineage of teachers and disciples. And it is very good that in discussing each verse you are identifying also the relationship between the particular disciple who composed the verse and his teacher Shankara, that relationship. So it is so important we speak of the sampradaya vit, one who knows the one who belongs to a sampradaya, a tradition, and one who knows that tradition. So I think it's always a fair question to ask, someone who presents himself as a teacher, who is your guru? What is the process of learning that you underwent that qualifies you to be a teacher? I think that's a very fair question that arises from your discussion. The second point I want to make, Shashi, just to add to what you've said in all of these verses, is that in this verse here, Jatilo Mundi Lunchita Kesha, and in other verses, we see an important insight. Pashyan na picha na pashyati mudha. You commented on that he or she knows but does not really know. Pashya na picha na pashyati. Sees but doesn't really see. So sees in the sense that he or she, that the false teacher sees in the sense that he or she recognizes the social significance of religion to people. That the religions have a hold on people's minds and people's emotions, but is willing to manipulate or to instrumentalize that for his or her own purposes. So in a broad sense here, I think we can see these verses in our contemporary world as speaking also widely to the instrumentalization of religion or the manipulation of religion for non-religious purposes, the instrumentalization or the manipulation of religion for non-religious purposes. So in our times, this, in the case of Shankara, this Jatilo Mundi, simply doing it to get a meal from people. But it will also apply, I think, today to those who are manipulating religion to and for economic gain for institutions, for example. I mean, there are many, many people in the religious world who run big institutions, manipulating or instrumentalizing religion to enrich institutions. There are also those who instrumentalize and manipulate religion to gain political power or state power. I think all of these larger ways in which religion is manipulated to serve non-religious ends, corrupt non-religious ends, would be covered in some senses. We have to extend the meaning of that when we look at these verses. And my final thought on these 4 verses that you covered, Shashi, is because it's also dealing with the phenomena of greed. Tadapina munchati asha pasha, the noose of greed, as you mentioned in this verse. And I think that when we speak about greed and we offer a critique of greed, it is not only an individual critique, because greed also has social consequences. Greed is an individual phenomena, that's true. It's very tragic when an individual human being becomes a victim of greed, because we know from our tradition, as you said, that greed is an illusory part to human fulfillment, is a false part to human fulfillment. But the tragedy of greed also is that it also has social consequences. And therefore, I think we also have to look at greed in a larger sense, even as we look at the instrumentalization of religion in a larger sense. We should look also at greed, corporate greed, the greed of institutions that are also could be also illusory, but also with devastating social consequences and social implications. So we all have a stake, in a sense, when greed becomes a dominant social value, as I think it has in so many countries today. When we judge human well-being only by asking, are you not better well off? Are you not better today economically? We reduce human well-being institutionally in the corporate world, or even as at the state level, we equate human well-being with economic well-being. Not that, as you said, not that economic well-being is not important, but it's a kind of reductionist approach also, where this is the only question we ask. You
Yep.
know, are you not better off today than you were, 5 years ago or 4 years ago? But our tradition, is not one that judges human flourishing or human well-being only by economic well-being. The measuring of human well-being only by economic well-being, I think, is a phenomenon of lifting greed, to giving greed a priority that it ought not to have in a wider and more holistic view of human well-being and human flourishing. So, that's all I wanted to add, Shashi. Thank you very much for your discussion today.
Thanks, Anand. Appreciate your comments. They're so important because we just have to look around the present day world and how the so-called religious scholars are having their mansions and they are flying their private planes and creating great institutions and unfortunately influencing politics as well.
Exactly.
So I think this is something that we should be aware of it. At the same time, you can see how Rishi Munis, the great teachers, were living in a very simple way and teaching the students without expecting anything in return. Very, very, very gratifying. And I think the important thing for us who are still sansaris is to make certain that these institutions, these ashramas, are strongly supported by sansaris like us to make certain that they survive for generations to come. Because without that, we'll be all in trouble. Unfortunately, as you rightly pointed out, Anant, is that you still need the basic needs to survive. And it's our responsibility to make sure that these wonderful education institutions are sustained, maintained, and thriving over the coming years. I think we feel lucky that our community is doing something to that effect. Make sure that we help other communities, other ashramas, like Arsha Vidya and everything else. Thank you. Also, other thing which I would comment in relation to Professor Ram Bachchan talking earlier is people came from different sampradayas. The lineage was different, but all these leaders of sampradayas or followers of sampradaya visited each other's ashramas and were able to communicate with the students or disciples of other sampradayas and share in their knowledge as well. So over a period of time, the students not only learn from their own teacher, but learn wisdom from other teachers, contemporary of their teachers, who came from different traditions, but talking about the Brahman nonetheless. So just want to emphasize that as well. So thank you, Anant. Appreciate it.